After the doors of Verrall's exhibition were locked for the night, the figures kept their places in the dark. They stood as they had stood all day, a queen in her stiff lace, a poisoner with a mild, ordinary face, an admiral with his glass raised to a sea that was only a painted board. When the attendant came through on his round, his lamp woke them one by one, a gleam on a glass eye, a shine along a waxen cheek, and put them back to sleep as he passed. Near the end of the long room there was a new figure that season, a man in the furs of the Arctic, half-turned, as though someone had called his name across the ice and he had stopped to answer. The attendant raised his lamp to it, as he did to all the rest, to see that nothing had been disturbed. And he stood very still. For the light ran across the face, and the face was not right. One side of it had slipped, the way a living face slips and cannot lift itself again. It was the face of a man who, that same night, was said to be 1,000 miles to the north, among the ice. Chapter 1. A Caller from Edinburgh. It was a bright, hard morning in the early autumn, the first with any edge of cold in it, and Holmes had been at the table since before I came down. He had his lens in one hand and a shallow tray of newspaper cuttings at his elbow, and he was pasting them into the great index he kept, where he stored the small wickedness of the world against the day he might have need of it. He did not look up. "You went round by the park," he said. "I did. There are plane leaves down all along the railings." I had long since stopped asking how he turned a man's morning over from the far side of a room. I took my chair and let him work. It was a little after 9 when the bell went. Holmes set down his lens and listened to it. "A client," he said, "and one who has not slept on the matter. No one rings a strange door in that fashion who has had a quiet night to think better of it." The woman Mrs. Hudson showed up was perhaps 23, fair and very tired. She wore a plain travelling dress of good grey cloth, and she carried a small leather case, which she set down by the door, as if she had carried it a long way and forgotten she still held it. She did not sit until Holmes asked her to a second time. "You have come a great distance to see me, Miss—" "Vane. Cora Vane." "Miss Vane. You have come down from Edinburgh, and you sat up the better part of last night before you came to me. And you have carried this trouble already to a door or two that closed gently in your face. You expect mine to close as well." She looked at him with the particular dismay of a person who has just been read. "How can you know that?" "The soot on your cuff is the fine grey sort one gets on the east coastline, and on no other. So you have come from the north. You have not brushed it away. A woman with an easy mind would have seen to it before she went calling, and yours has been anywhere but easy. You did not sleep in a bed last night. Your sleeve is creased down the one side only, the way cloth creases in a chair, and never on a pillow." He paused, and his voice gentled. "And you came in expecting that I should not believe you. You have the look of someone who has told her trouble once already and been sent very kindly away." The composure she had carried in with her gave a little. "I have been to the Geographical Society," she said, "and to Scotland Yard. They were both very polite. They both think grief has got the better of me." She drew a breath. "My father is Sir Edmund Vane." She said it as though it explained a good deal, and to Holmes, I believe, it did. Every reader of the morning papers knew the name. Vane had been twice into the northern ice and come back both times, which was more than most could say, and a public subscription had been raised that very year to send him a third time. He was the sort of hero a nation likes to have, bluff, bearded, photographed on the deck of his ship with one boot on a coil of rope. He was to sail a month ago, she went on, from Tilbury for the Arctic. I did not see him off. I had been in Edinburgh since the spring with my mother's people, 200 miles away. A wire came to say he had gone aboard and the ship had cleared. And then I came down to London. And something has happened in London, said Holmes, that you cannot make anyone hear. Yes. She pressed her gloves flat in her lap. There is a new exhibition in Leicester Square, Verrall's. Everyone has been to see it. I went on Tuesday with my cousin, only to pass the afternoon. She stopped, and when she went on, her voice had dropped. My father is in it, in wax, among the famous men, in his furs, as he is in the photographs. And beneath him there is a card, and the card says, Modelled from the life. That is no impossibility in itself, said Holmes. A well-known man may be modelled. What is it that troubles you? It was his face, she said. It was wrong. One side of it had fallen. The mouth was pulled down at the corner, and the eye above it was heavy, half shut, as though it could not open. I have never seen him so. No one has ever seen him so. She looked from Holmes to me and back again, helplessly. I could not say what it meant, only that it was wrong, and that it frightened me, and that when I said so, everyone told me it was my nerves. I had seen faces fall in that one-sided way, in the wards and at the bedside, and I did not much like to hear it described upon a face of wax. But I held my tongue, for I could not yet have told her what I was thinking, and it was not my place to frighten her further. Holmes had gone quite still, in the way he did when something had caught and would not let him go. Let me be certain of the order of it, he said. You have not set eyes on your father since the spring. Not since Easter. And the figure was placed in the exhibition this last month, here in London. Modelled, the card says, from the life. Yes. Yet your father, this past month, is at sea, bound for the ice. So they all tell me. Then we have a small difficulty, Miss Vane, and it is a very interesting one. He set his fingertips together. A man cannot sit in a sculptor's room to be modelled from the life and be 1,000 miles away at the edge of the ice in the same few weeks. The two things will not both stand. One of them is a lie. She said nothing. I think she had felt the shape of it for days without daring to put it into words. They told you that grief had got into your eyes, Holmes said. It had not. A man may lie, Miss Vane, and a photograph may flatter, but a thing made faithfully from the life keeps what the living would give a great deal to forget. Your eyes were the one honest witness in that room. You were right to trust them, and right to come. For a moment she could not answer him at all. He rose and took his coat from the back of the door. We will go and look at this figure, Watson, he said. This morning, before the crowds, and before the gas is lit, while the light is still plain and tells the truth. I have a great curiosity to see a man who is in two places at once, and a greater one to learn which of the two is real. Chapter 2. Verrall's Exhibition. Leicester Square was being swept when we came into it, and the light lay flat and grey across the wet stone, with no kindness in it at all. Holmes seemed glad of that. Gaslight flatters wax, Watson, he said as we crossed to the doors. It softens it and warms it, and tells a comfortable lie. Plain daylight tells none. I have chosen our hour with some care. Verrall's exhibition kept a tall front with a painted board above it, on which a row of the famous dead looked down at the passers-by. Within, the doors had not yet opened to the public, but a word from Holmes and a card sent in brought the proprietor himself out to us at a hurried walk. Mr. Cecil Verrall was a round, glossy man in a checked waistcoat, with the bright, ready warmth of one who has spent his life persuading people through a turnstile. He shook us both by the hand before he well knew who we were. "Gentlemen, gentlemen, we are not open until 10, but for friends of the yard, the door is always—" He caught the name on Holmes's card, and his manner climbed a further notch. "Mr. Holmes, well, the honor is the house's. You have come to see the gallery." "I have come to see one figure in it." "Ah." A small flicker, there and gone. "The new gentleman, the explorer. He has been the making of my season, sir, I do not mind telling you. There has been a queue down to the square most days. The whole town wishes to look at a hero." He led us in, talking as he went. "And modelled from the life, every line of him. We do not stoop to guesswork here." The long room was dim and cool and very quiet, and the figures stood along it in their patient ranks. By that plain morning light, they were not quite so living as they meant to be. One saw the join where a wig met a brow. One saw the dull, settled look that wax takes on after a year or two of lamps and breath and dust. A faint yellowing of the flesh, a film upon the colour. They were handsome work, but they were old work, and the eye knew it. Sir Edmund Vane stood near the end, a little apart, in a case of his own. He was a big man, or had been built a big man, bearded and broad, half-turned with one hand lifted, as though he had heard his name called over a great distance and paused upon the ice to answer it. He wore the heavy furs of the north. Beneath him, a neat card read in a fair, clear hand, "Sir Edmund Vane, modelled from the life." And the face was wrong. I had seen that wrongness before, though never upon wax. One side of it had let go. The corner of the mouth was drawn down and would not lift. The cheek above it had lost its line and fallen slack. The eyelid on that same side hung heavy and half-closed over the eye, so that the man seemed to look out at the world from behind a shutter that had jammed. It is the mark a stroke of apoplexy leaves on a living face, when the seizure has spent itself and the man survives it. The muscles of the one side give way and do not answer again, and the face slips, just so, and stays slipped. I had stood at more than one bedside where a strong man had been pulled down into that same crooked stillness in an afternoon. To see it copied here, faithfully, upon the famous features of a man the papers showed, hale and laughing on his deck, turned me cold in a way the room had not. I said nothing of it. It was not the moment, and Verrall was at my shoulder. Holmes had taken out his lens. He did not touch the figure. He went over it inch by inch with that close, hovering attention I knew so well, bending to the face, to the join at the hairline, to the backs of the waxen hands. The morning light fell full upon it and gave up everything. "The colour is fresh," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Look at the flesh of the temple, Watson, and then look at the Admiral yonder. The Admiral has stood here long enough to go sallow and dull. This is bright still. This wax was poured and tinted within the month, no more." He moved to the eye. "And here is the strangeness of it. The fallen lid is no accident of the modelling. It is made so, on purpose, with great care. A careless hand makes a man too well. It mends what it copies. Only a very honest hand, or a very obedient one, sets down a ruin exactly as the ruin stands." He straightened. Mr. Verrall, who made this figure? Our own modeller, sir, a craftsman of the first rank. His name? There I must beg the house's privilege. The warmth thinned a little. We do not give out the names of our artists. It is a trade, Mr. Holmes, and a jealous one. A rival house would have the man away with a better wage by Friday. You sat Sir Edmund yourself, then, here in this building? The arrangements were made through the proper quarter. Verrall's hands had begun to wash one another. A gentleman of his standing is not modelled in a shop off the square, sir, you will understand. There were others who saw to it. I took delivery of a finished work, and I was glad to have it. Others, said Holmes pleasantly. Yes, I begin to think there were a good many others. He stepped back and considered the whole figure once more, the furs included. These are not his, he said, these furs. They are new. There is no salt in them, no wear at the cuff, no grease where a man's wrists would have rubbed them on 100 cold mornings. A coat that had been into the ice twice would carry the ice in it. This has been into a costumier's, and nowhere colder. Verrall had no answer ready for that. You took delivery, you say, Holmes went on. The figure came to you crated. Where do you keep the crate, and whatever came with it? The proprietor hesitated, then shrugged, as a man does who decides that a packing case can do no harm. He led us through a curtained arch into a low back room stacked with the lumber of the trade, broken plinths and bolts of cloth, and a headless figure or two waiting their turn. The crate stood against the wall, lid prized loose, straw spilling from it. And beside the crate stood a traveling trunk. It was a good trunk, brass-cornered, much traveled, and on its end, stamped in worn gilt, were the initials E.V. That came with him, said Verrall almost proudly. His own. The society sent it round for the look of the thing, to stand at his feet in the case. A hero's own trunk, sir. The public dotes on a true relic. Holmes was already down on one knee beside it. A luggage label was pasted to the lid, fresh, its paste scarcely dry, half over an older, torn one. He did not exclaim. He only looked at it for a long moment in the gray light from the high window, and I saw his jaw tighten by a hair. For the label did not read for Tilbury, nor for any dock, nor for the sea. It was a carrier's label, and it was directed north, to an address on the high, cold edge of London, where the streets climbed toward Highgate. The trunk of a man bound 1,000 miles for the Arctic had not gone down to his ship at all. It had been sent quietly the other way, into the city, not out of it. Chapter 3. The Man Who Works Only from Life. We came out of Verrall's into the noise of the square, and Holmes stood a moment on the step with his eyes half shut, the way a man does when he is turning a thing over and does not wish to be jostled out of it. You did not ask him again for the maker's name, I said. He would not have given it, and a man who refuses you a thing twice has had time to think why he is refusing. He drew on his gloves. But I do not need Verrall. I have the maker's name already. He signed it himself in his own fashion, behind the figure's ear. You found a mark? I found a hand. He began to walk, and I went with him. There are perhaps 4 men in London who could have modelled that eye. Each has his own way with the lids and the turn of the ear, as plain to a reading eye as a signature on a cheque. I gave some little study to the wax modellers once. It was a dull monograph, and nobody read it, but it serves me this morning. The man we want is Hugh Greaves. He keeps a studio at the top of a house off the Marylebone Road, and he is reckoned the best of them, and the proudest. Greaves's studio was reached by a long stair, and at the top of it the light changed altogether. The room ran the depth of the house, and its whole north wall was glass, so that a cold, even, shadowless light came down upon everything and showed it plainly. An artist who works with a face, I understood at once, would want exactly such a light that never shifts and never flatters and tells him the truth of a line. The truth was everywhere about us. Heads stood on every surface, in clay, in plaster, in the pale wax itself, some smooth and finished, some no more than a brow and a nose rising out of the block. On a shelf at my elbow lay a shallow tray, and in it, looking up, was a row of glass eyes, blue and grey and brown, each catching the window in a small bright point, so that the empty things seemed to watch us cross the floor. I did not greatly care for them. Mr. Hugh Greaves rose from his bench and looked at us without warmth. He was a lean man of 50 or so, with the long, careful hands of his trade, and the still, measuring look of one who spends his days reading faces and is not easily read in return. "Mr. Greaves," said Holmes, "I have come to pay you a compliment. I saw your Explorer this morning at Verrall's. It is the finest piece of modelling I have seen in London these 10 years. The stillness in the man eased by a degree. Praise of his work was a door, and Holmes had found it. "You have an eye, then," Greaves said. "Most who file past it see a coat and a beard. They do not see the work. I saw the work. I saw, above all, the eye and the fallen cheek. A lesser man would have mended them, would have given the public the hero whole, as the photographs give him. You did not. You set down the face exactly as it was." I set down what I see. There was a flat pride in it. I do not improve a man. That is not modelling, sir. That is flattery, and any fool with a thumb can flatter. "And you did not work from the photographs." The look he turned on Holmes was almost one of insult. "From a photograph." He said the word as another man might name a bad smell. "I have never modelled a living head from a photograph in my life, and I never shall. A photograph is a flat grey lie. It gives you the shadow of a face and tells you nothing of how it sits upon the bone. No. When I take a man, I take him from the life. He sits before me, in that chair, in this light, for as many hours as it needs, and I model what is there. There is no other way that is worth the doing." I confess that for a moment I did not see the size of what he had said. Then I did, and I liked the understanding very little. For if Hugh Greaves had modelled Sir Edmund Vane from the life, from the living man, seated in a chair in London, then Sir Edmund Vane had sat in that chair, recently, with that fallen face upon him, while the whole world and his own daughter believed him a month gone toward the Arctic. Holmes's voice did not change at all. "He sat for you here, then, in this room." And there the proud flow of the man stopped, as a stream stops at a sluice. "That," said Greaves, "I am not at liberty to say." "You have just told me you work only from the life. The figure exists. Therefore the man sat. I ask you only where." "And I have told you I am not at liberty to say where, nor when, nor for whom." He had drawn himself up, and the wariness was back in his face, harder than before. "I was engaged on the particular understanding that I should hold my tongue upon the whole business. I was paid for the work. and I was paid again, and handsomely, for my silence. A man may sell his craft, sir. He need not sell his word along with it. Engaged by Verrall? Not by Verrall. A small, contemptuous breath. Verrall took the finished thing and asked no questions, which is the most sense I ever knew him show. No. The commission came from a quarter that does not haggle. He stopped himself, plainly feeling he had said a word too many, and his mouth shut on the rest of it. But Holmes had the edge of the thing now, and he did not let go. "A gentleman came to you," he said quietly. "Not a showman. A man of business and of standing, who spoke of an honor to be protected, and who paid you twice, once for your hand and once for your silence, and asked you to forget the face you had modeled the moment the wax was cool. Was that the way of it?" Reeves said nothing, which was answer enough. "The society," said Holmes. The sculptor's jaw tightened, and still he would not speak. But something had moved behind his eyes at the word, and Holmes saw it land, as I saw it. "You need not name the man," Holmes said, gentler now. "You have kept your bargain, Mr. Greaves. You are not the one who will have to answer for it." He turned for the door, and then turned back, and his glance went once more about that bright, watchful room, the heads, the tray of glass eyes, the cold, true light. "You did an honest piece of work. I am sorry to tell you it may prove the most dangerous thing in London. A man who sets down exactly what he sees does not always know what he has seen." We went down the long stair in silence. At the bottom, Holmes paused with his hand on the door to the street. "He was paid to make a hero, Watson," he said, "and paid again to forget that he had made a sick man. There is only one body in London with the money and the reason to do that, and to send a trunk north into Highgate instead of south to the sea. We must call upon the Meridian Geographical Society. But first, I think, upon the Yard, for I should like to know how a man who never sailed came to be written so plainly into a ship's company." Chapter 4. The Yard and the Manifest. It is not every man at Scotland Yard who is glad to see Sherlock Holmes come through the door, but there was one who was, and she came down the corridor to meet us with her notebook already in her hand. Constable Aggie Finch had filled out a little since the business at the lighthouse the year before. She stood straighter, and there was a quietness about her now that had been all eagerness then. But the sharp, watchful look in her eye was the same, and so was the small flush of pleasure she could not quite govern when she saw who her callers were. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson." She lowered her voice. "I hoped it might be you. I have been waiting for someone to take this seriously, and it was not going to be anyone in this building." "Then you know already why we have come," said Holmes. "The young lady, Miss Vane." Finch glanced back along the corridor and drew us aside into a bare little room with a deal table and a single high window. "She came to me on Wednesday. It fell to me to take her statement. And I will tell you plainly, sir, I did not like the smell of it. But I am a constable, and what I do not like is not evidence. My inspector heard her out, was very kind, and wrote across the foot of the page that the lady was overwrought and the matter closed." She set her jaw. "He may be right, but I have not been able to leave it alone." "Tell me what the building believes," said Holmes, "and then we shall see what it ought to believe." Finch opened her notebook. "The Society reported Sir Edmund sailed from Tilbury aboard the Northern Crown 4 weeks ago last Thursday. There is a passenger list properly lodged. There were witnesses on the quay who saw him go aboard and waved him off. As far as the yard is concerned, a famous man got on a ship in front of a crowd, and the ship sailed. There is nothing here for the police. Men are allowed to leave the country, sir. They are. May I see the list? She had been ready for that. From inside the notebook, she drew a folded sheet, a clerk's copy of the ship's manifest, and spread it on the deal table under the cold light from the high window. Holmes did not snatch at it. He took out his lens and bent over the paper as he had bent over the wax that morning, slowly, line by line, and I watched the page over his shoulder. It was an ordinary thing to look at, a long column of names in a clerk's round, patient hand, with cabins and classes set against them. Holmes read down it without a word until he came to the middle of the page, and there he stopped, and stayed stopped. "Constable," he said, "come and look. You have a good eye. Tell me what you see at the 11th line." Finch leaned in beside him, frowning, plainly anxious to be worth the asking. For a long moment she saw only what I saw, a name among names. Then her breath changed. "The ink," she said slowly. It is not the same ink." "Go on." All the rest of the page is one grey-black, faded a little, all of a piece, as though it were written at one sitting with one pen. But this one line, Sir Edmund's line, is darker, blacker, fresher. She looked up, half afraid to be wrong. And the hand is different too, now I look at it. The other names lean one way, his leans the other, and the letters are smaller, squeezed in, as if it were put in afterward, into a space that was left. "It was put in afterward," said Holmes quietly. "Into a space that was left. That is exactly what you see, Constable, and you are the first person in this building to see it. The clerk who made this list never wrote that name. It was added to his column later, in another hand, with another ink, by someone who had the page to himself for an hour. Sir Edmund Vane was written aboard the Northern Crown. He did not walk aboard her." Finch had gone rather pale and rather bright both at once. I have seen a young officer's whole notion of the work shift in a single moment, and I believe I saw it then. She had felt the wrongness of the thing for 3 days and not been able to lay a finger upon it. Now she had seen, with her own eye, precisely where it lay. She would never again quite trust a paper merely because it was filed. "But the witnesses," she said, "on the quay. There were people who watched him go up the gangway." "There were people who watched a man in furs go up a gangway," said Holmes. "That is a different thing. Tell me how it is set down in your statements. I think you will find it told the same way each time." She turned back through her notebook, and as she read, I saw the color of it for the first time. "A tall figure," she read, "in heavy furs, the collar turned up against the wind, a fur cap low on the brow. Helped up the gangway by 2 of the society's men, 1 on each side. He turned at the rail, lifted a hand to the crowd, and went below at once, out of the weather." She stopped. "It is the same in all of them. Nobody got near him. Nobody spoke with him. They were kept back on the quay. He was on the gangway a moment, muffled to the eyes, and then he was gone below, and the ship was casting off." "A man muffled to the eyes," said Holmes, "at a distance, in the wind, helped along by 2 who knew the part he was to play, shown for 1 moment, and hurried out of sight. Constable, I could put any one of 6 men into those furs, and the same crowd would weep to see their hero go. They did not see Sir Edmund Vane. They saw a coat with 2 keepers, and they saw what they had come to see. I thought of the new, unworn furs on the figure at Verrall's, and the salt that was not in them, and I kept my thoughts to myself, for I had begun to see where the whole of it must end. "There is one thing more I should know," said Holmes, folding the manifest with great care. "This expedition, it was paid for by subscription, was it not? The papers made much of it." "They did, sir." Finch turned a page. "A public fund got up through the society. Schools sent their pennies. There was a deal of money in it, thousands by what was printed. The society holds it, in Sir Edmund's name, against the costs of the voyage." "Against a voyage," said Holmes softly, "that no longer needs to sail, so long as the world believes it has. Yes, I think I begin to see the shape of the thing, Watson, and it is not a pretty one." He stood and tucked the lens away. "Here is where we stand. A man whose own daughter has not seen him since the spring is modelled from the life in London with a sick man's face. His furs have never been north of a costumier's. His trunk has gone up to Highgate when it should have gone down to the sea. And the one hard proof that he ever boarded his ship is a forgery in fresh ink, written into a clerk's list by a hand that was not the clerk's." He looked at the folded paper in his hand as though it were the saddest thing in the room. "Every door that should lead us to Sir Edmund Vane aboard his ship," he said, "leads us instead back into London. There is nothing left that says he ever went aboard at all. The question is no longer whether he sailed. The question is where in this city they have put him, and which of them thought it a kindness." Chapter 5. A Favour Ode. In Limehouse. By evening, Holmes had done with the parts of the case that keep records. "We have wrung the official world dry, Watson," he said, as the cab carried us east. "It has told us all it is willing to tell, which is that it has been lied to. The manifest is forged, the furs are false, the trunk has gone the wrong way. But a forgery so neat is not the work of frightened men acting in a hurry. Someone arranged this. Someone who has done such things before and knows how a disappearance is made to look like a sailing. I should like to know who. And there is one person in London who keeps that sort of knowledge and sells it after her fashion." The cab set us down where the streets grow narrow and the river is never far off, and the lamps stand wider apart. Limehouse by night is not a place a man strolls in for pleasure. But Holmes went up a certain dark stair as though he had a standing appointment, and at the top a door was opened to us before he had well knocked by a small, grave girl who looked at us, said nothing, and stood aside. The room within was not at all what the stair had promised. It was small and very clean and warm, and lit by a single steady lamp, set so that its light fell on the visitor and left the lady of the house in shadow. There was no clutter in it anywhere. Madame Vesper Lyle sat behind a plain table with her hands folded, and she watched us cross to her with the unhurried interest of a person to whom very little is new. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "and the good doctor. You bring the cold in with you." Her voice was light and dry and amused. "Sit. You have the look of a man who wants something he cannot buy." "I never could buy from you, madam." "No. That is what I like about you." Her eyes moved over him, reading as his read others. "You have been north of the river all day, looking at a dead man who is not dead. The whole town is looking at him. They pay a shilling at the door. You did not pay a shilling. You went before the gas was lit. a small smile. "I hear most things, Mr. Holmes. I do not hear how you knew to go early. That is your trade, and I leave it to you." "Then you know whose figure stands at Verrall's?" "I know there is a hero in wax who ought to be in the ice, and that his daughter has been weeping in the wrong offices, and that wiser people than her inspector have decided not to notice." She tilted her head. "What I do not yet know is what you have come up my stair to take away. Ask it plainly. The hour is late, and the river is loud." "Two things," said Holmes. "First, a disappearance was made this past month, and made well. A man was taken out of his own life and packed away, and the proofs were arranged so cleanly that the police see nothing to trouble them. That is not done by a committee of nervous gentlemen. That is done by a craftsman. I want the craftsman's name." For the first time, the lightness went out of her. It was a very small change, no more than a stillness settling where there had been ease, but I saw it, and I think Holmes had come east chiefly to see whether it would come. "Now there," she said softly, "you ask a thing I cannot sell, for I do not own it." "You know of him, then?" "I know the manner of him. So do one or two others who keep their voices down." She turned her folded hands a little on the table. "When something difficult is to be smoothed, and smoothed without noise, a scandal made to vanish, a man made to step quietly out of the world, there is a quarter you may go to, if you are recommended. You do not learn a name. You learn that a friend, who must not be named, will speak for you to another friend, and the work is done, and no money changes hands at all." She looked up, and her gaze was steady and a little cold. "There is no fee, Mr. Holmes, only a favor, owed and called in when it suits. That is the whole of what I can tell you, and I tell it to you for nothing, which I do not often do." Holmes had gone very quiet. "A favor owed," he repeated. "Always. It is cheaper than money, and binds a great deal harder." She let that lie between us for a moment. "I would not look too hard at the man who smoothed your explorer away, were I you. Settle the explorer. Leave the smoother be. He will keep." "You have told me to leave alone a thing you will not name," said Holmes. "That is the second time this year I have been warned off a shadow by someone who knows more than they will say. I begin to think they are the same shadow." She did not answer that at all, which was itself an answer, and I saw Holmes mark it and fold it away inside him as he had folded the manifest, against some later day. He did not press her. One does not, I have learned, press at that sort of silence. He only let it pass, and came to his second question. "The other thing I want," he said, "I think you can give. A trunk was sent up to Highgate this month, to the high streets where they climb. I have the district, but not the door. Where, in Highgate, do quiet people send a man they wish kept and not seen?" At that, the amusement came back into her, as though the dangerous ground were behind them, and she were on her own again. "Ah, that I can give you, and gladly, for it puts you a little in my debt, and I do so enjoy your being in my debt." She rose, and the lamp threw her shadow tall up the clean wall. "There is a house up there that takes in the kind of patient whose family would rather the world forgot him, the mad, the ruined, the inconveniently ill. It is discreet, and it is dear, and it asks no questions of whoever pays the bills. The neighbors think it a gentleman's private hospital. In a way, it is. It has a name. It has a name." She looked at him with something that was almost kindness and almost warning. Strood House. Go up and find your hero there, Mr. Holmes, sitting in a chair with the wrong side of his face, while London weeps for him at sea. And when you have him, remember who set your feet upon the stair. I shall. Chapter 6. Strood House. Strood House stood behind a high wall on the cold shoulder of Highgate Hill, where the streets climb and the air thins and the great city falls away below in a grey haze of its own smoke. We came up to it the next morning, for Holmes had chosen his hour once again. A house keeps its secrets best by lamplight, he said, as the cab laboured up the rise. In the plain light of morning it cannot help but show you what it is. And it showed us. From the road it had the look of a gentleman's residence, large and well kept, with a sweep of gravel and a painted door. But the wall along its front was higher than any private wall need be, and every window of the upper floor was shuttered, each one, though it was past 9 and the sun was full on the glass. It was a house built to keep something within and the world's eye without. And once a man had seen that, he could not unsee it. Constable Finch was waiting for us at the gate. She had come, she told us quietly, on her own time. Her inspector had closed the file, and to him a closed file was a closed thing. But she had not been able to make her conscience close along with it. And so she stood there at the gate in her plain coat, off-duty and uneasy and resolved. "If I am wrong, sir," she said, "I have wasted a morning. If I am right, I would rather have wasted it here than sat at my desk and let it lie." "You are not wrong, Constable," said Holmes, "and you will not always have a desk. Come." A maid let us into a hall that was clean and bare and smelled faintly of carbolic. Somewhere deeper in the house, a small bell rang once, a single clear note, the sort a nurse might ring to call an attendant down a passage, and was still. I gave it no thought at all. But I saw Holmes turn his head a little, the way a man will at a sound just at the edge of hearing, and hold it turned a moment, before the matron came and his attention went to her. She was a spare, careful woman with quiet eyes, and the sight of Holmes's card and of Finch's plain official manner behind it did something to those eyes that she could not wholly govern. "We do not receive callers," she said. "Our patients are here for rest. Their families ask for privacy, and we keep it. That is the whole of what this house is for." "I am sure of it," said Holmes pleasantly. "I have come about a patient who was brought to you this past month, a gentleman, tall, bearded, lately struck down on one side, sent to you with no name worth the giving, and his bills paid by a quarter that asks you no questions, and wishes none asked of it." The matron's hand closed on the edge of the door. "I must ask you to go," she said. "You may ask it. I am afraid we shall not." She looked from Holmes to Finch, and then, with the air of a woman reaching past her own authority for a greater one, she said, "Then you will wait. There is a gentleman of the society in the house this morning, seeing to the comfort of one of our patients. He must speak to you, not I." She went up the stairs, and we heard a low word exchanged on the landing above, and after a moment a man came down to us. He was perhaps 50, neat and grey and unhurried, in a good dark coat, with the smooth, settled look of a man who has spent his life upon committees and is used to being the calmest person in any room. He came down the last of the stairs with one hand on the rail, taking our measure as he came, and when he reached the hall, he inclined his head to us with a courtesy that did not warm his face by a degree. "I am Reginald Pennington," he said, "Secretary to the Meridian Geographical Society. And you, sir, are Mr. Sherlock Holmes, whom I had rather hoped not to meet upon this particular stair. Then you know why I am on it. I can imagine why." He folded his hands before him. "May I appeal to you, before this goes further, as a man of sense to another? There is in this house a sick and broken gentleman who was, until a little while ago, the pride of this nation. He has been struck down in a manner that has taken his strength, his speech, the use of one whole side of him. Would you have that paraded? Would you have the newspapers set upon the wreck of a hero, and the school children who sent their pennies told that their hero is a drooling invalid in a chair? There are kindnesses, Mr. Holmes, that wear the look of deceit only to those who do not understand them." "It is a fine speech," said Holmes, "and I dare say you have had a month to polish it. But it leaves a good deal out. It leaves out a forged line in a ship's company, in fresh ink, in a hand that was not the clerk's. It leaves out a man in furs, hurried up a gangway before a weeping crowd, to make them witness a sailing that never was. It leaves out a public subscription of some thousands of pounds, raised to send a living man to the ice, and held now against a voyage that you have taken the greatest pains to make the world believe is underway." Pennington said nothing. "You did not hide a sick man to spare him the newspapers," Holmes went on, and there was no warmth in his voice now at all. "A man may be nursed in quiet in his own home for that. You hid him because a hero who has had a stroke in his bed is no use to you, and a hero lost heroically in the ice is worth a great deal, worth the keeping of every penny of that fund and the sealing of a great name and the honor of your society besides. You meant in your own good time to let the ice take him. You meant to announce his death where no man could ever go to look." "You have no notion," said Pennington very low, "of what hangs upon that society's name, of how much good it does, of what comes down if it comes down." But the smoothness had gone out of him, and what was left was the thing underneath, which was a frightened and very stubborn man. "I have a fair notion," said Holmes, "and I have a better notion of where Sir Edmund Vane is at this moment. He is not in the ice. He is at the top of this stair, behind one of those shuttered windows, in a chair, with his ruined face turned away from the light." Let me stop the account here for a moment, as Holmes himself stopped, with his foot upon the lowest stair. For you have now seen everything that I had seen. You have seen the fallen face in the wax, and the photographs in which that same man is whole and laughing. You have heard the sculptor swear he works from no photograph, but only from the living man before him. You have seen the new furs with no salt in them, and the trunk sent north when it should have gone south, and the name written into a ship's list in the wrong ink by the wrong hand. And you have heard of the money, and what becomes of it if a hero never comes home. You know now that Sir Edmund Vane is in this house. The question Holmes had answered, and that I leave a moment with you, is the deeper one. Why was a thing of wax the one witness in all of London that could not be silenced or sent away? And what was a faithful sculptor's honest work always going to betray, however well the rest of it was done? Holmes set his hand upon the rail. "Come, Watson," he said quietly. "Constable, we have kept Sir Edmund waiting long enough." And he turned and went up toward the shuttered door. Chapter 7. The Solution. The stair turned once upon itself, and at the top there was a short landing with 3 doors. 2 stood open upon empty, swept rooms. The third was shut. Pennington came up behind us slowly, one hand on the rail, like a man climbing toward a thing he had hoped never to reach. He did not try again to stop us. I think he knew by then that it was past stopping. Holmes opened the shut door. The room within was plain and clean, and full of the grey morning light that came through a single unshuttered pane at the top of the window. There was a narrow bed, and a table with a cup upon it, and a chair set facing the muffled glass. And in the chair sat an old man. He had been a big man once. The frame of it was still there, in the broad shoulders and the heavy hands, and the beard was the beard of every photograph I had seen in the papers that week. But the strength had gone out of him as water goes out of a cloth. One hand lay curled in his lap and did not move, and the face, when he turned it toward the sound of the door, was the face from the case at Verrall's, exactly and to the life. One side of it had fallen. The mouth was drawn down at the corner. The eyelid hung heavy over the eye, half closed, and could not lift. But the other eye was open, and it was bright, and it found us, and it was full of a man's whole understanding. I crossed to him without being asked, for I am a doctor before I am anything else in such a room, and I took the curled hand, and I looked into the one good eye. What I saw there I shall not soon forget. The body had been struck down on the one side and would not answer again. But the mind behind the ruin was whole. He knew us for strangers. He knew, I am certain, a great deal more than that. He had been sitting in that chair through a month of silence, hearing the world weep for a death that had not come, and he had not been able to say one word to call it back. "Apoplexy, Holmes," I said quietly. "A seizure of the brain, some weeks old. It has taken the one side, and his speech with it. But he hears us. He understands every word." "I never doubted that he did," said Holmes. He did not go near the old man. He stood a little back with his hat in his hand, and there was a gentleness in him that he did not often show. "Sir Edmund, forgive us. We have come a long way to find you, and there are a great many people who will be very glad to learn that we have." The good eye moved to him and held him, and I saw something pass across the broken face that the broken face could not shape into words. Then Holmes turned, and the gentleness went out of his voice, and he faced Pennington in the doorway. "You asked me downstairs whether I would parade a broken hero," he said. "Let me tell you instead how I knew, before ever I climbed this stair, that the hero was broken, and where he was broken, and when. For it was all written down plainly in the one place you could not reach to alter it." "You have made guesses," said Pennington, "and dressed them as proof." "I have made no guesses at all. I have only looked." Holmes set down his hat upon the table. "Begin with the figure at Verrall's. His own daughter stood before it and felt that it was wrong, though she could not say why. I can say why. The face had fallen on the one side, exactly as this face has fallen, the dropped mouth, the heavy lid. That is the mark of a stroke survived. Now, every photograph of Sir Edmund Vane that this nation has ever seen shows him whole, hale, upright, laughing on his deck. There is not one image in all the papers in which his face has slipped. Why? Because every one of them was made before he was struck down. The wax shows a thing that exists in no photograph on earth. "A modeler may invent a flaw," said Pennington. "He may. This one did not, and you know it better than any man living, for you engaged him on the strength of it. Holmes's eye was hard. I went to Hugh Greaves. I will own that for an hour I thought him the guilty heart of the thing. He was secretive. He had been paid, and paid twice, and bound to silence. A suspicious man would have stopped there and called him the villain. But Greaves is no villain. Greaves is the one wholly honest man in this whole sorry business, and his honesty is the rock you have all broken upon. He told me with great contempt that he has never in his life modeled a living head from a photograph. He works from the life, or not at all. The man sits before him in his chair, in his north light, and he sets down what he sees exactly, mending nothing. A lesser artist would have given the public the hero whole. Greaves gave them the truth, because he knows no other way to work. He let that stand a moment in the quiet room. "Do you see it now?" he said. The wax was modelled from the life. Therefore Sir Edmund sat for it, living, in a chair, in London, and the wax shows the fallen face. Therefore, when he sat, he had already been struck down. A man cannot sit in a sculptor's room in London with a month-old stroke upon him, and at the same hour be a fortnight out into the Arctic ice aboard the Northern Crown. The two will not stand together. One of them is a lie, and the lie was yours. Pennington said nothing. After that, Holmes went on, the rest was only confirmation, and you had left it everywhere. The wax itself was fresh, bright still, where the older figures beside it had gone dull and sallow with their years under the lamps. It was poured within the month. The furs upon it were new, with no salt in them, and no wear at the cuff. Furs that had been into a costumier's, and nowhere colder, on a man the world believed had worn them twice into the ice. His trunk, sent round to stand at his feet for the look of the thing, carried a carrier's label, directed not to any dock, but north, up here, to Highgate. And the one hard proof that he had ever gone aboard at all, his name in the ship's company, was written into the clerk's list afterward, in a blacker ink, in a hand that leaned the wrong way, crowded into a space that had been left for it. A crowd on the quay wept for a muffled figure, helped up a gangway by two of your men, and hurried below before any soul could come near him. They did not see Sir Edmund. They saw a coat with two keepers. "And why?" said Finch suddenly from the doorway. She had been very still, but she could hold the question no longer, and it was, I think, the question the whole world would have asked. Why go to all of it, sir? Why not simply nurse him quiet at home and tell the truth? "Because of the money, Constable," said Holmes. "A public subscription of some thousands of pounds raised to send a living hero to the ice. School children sent their pennies to it. If Sir Edmund is known to have been struck down in his bed before he ever sailed, the voyage is off, the fund must go back, and a great society stands shamed before the nation it asked for the money. But if Sir Edmund sailed, if he is out there now, beyond all reach, then the fund is spent as it was given, the books are clean, and the great name is safe. And in a little while, when it suits, word comes home that the hero has died gloriously in the field, in a place where no man can ever go to look. The fund is kept, the legend is sealed. And this man," he did not point, but his voice turned toward the chair, "is left to die by inches in a hired room, declared dead by men who found him inconvenient to keep alive." "It was never meant cruelly," said Pennington, and his voice had broken at last. "You may believe that or not. There was a great deal of good that name does. There were 100 futures resting on it. I told myself I was protecting all of them. I dare say you did, said Holmes. Men tell themselves a great many things to climb a stair like this one with a quiet conscience. But you would have buried a living man to balance a ledger and called it kindness, and let his daughter wear black for a father who was sitting up here all the while, hearing her grieve through the floor. He took up his hat. No, I have let a secret keep once or twice in my life, when the keeping of it harmed no one, and the telling would have served nothing but the truth's vanity. This is not such a secret. This is a living man wrongly counted among the dead, and a nation's grief turned to a society's profit. It will not keep. I will not let it. Chapter 8. Furs that Never Saw Ice. The thing did not come down all at once. Such things never do. But it came down. Sir Edmund Vane was brought from Strood House that same week, in a closed carriage and in daylight, to a quiet house of his own where his daughter could keep him. I went with them, and I attended him for a time after, and I may say this much as a doctor and leave the rest. The body would not mend. The one side was gone past mending, and his sailing days, which had been the whole of his life, were over for good. But the mind behind the fallen face was sound to the last, and there was a great peace came into the one good eye on the morning we took him out through that high gate and down the hill, with the shutters thrown open and the light let in. The first thing he was given when pen and paper were set before his good hand was the means to make his mark upon a single sheet. It was not a long message. It took him the better part of an hour, the letters crooked and slow. But it was in his own hand, and it said that he lived, and it was witnessed, and it could not be argued away. The Society's announcement of his glorious death, which I have reason to believe was already drafted and waiting in a drawer, was never made. Miss Cora Vane came to Baker Street once more before the autumn was out to thank us. She was not weeping this time. She sat where she had sat before, and she was quiet and clear, and she took Holmes's hand in both of hers, and could not at first find the words she had come to say. "They all told me it was my grief," she said at last. "Everyone. That I was a foolish girl who could not bear her father gone, and saw wrongness where there was only wax. And all the while he was alive, and not 3 miles from where I sat, and I had been the only one in London to look at his face and believe it." "You looked, Miss Vane," said Holmes, "when wiser people had decided not to. That is rarer than you think, and worth more. They could make the wax lie in every particular but the one that mattered, and your eyes caught it, where the whole of London had looked and seen nothing. Never unlearn that." As for the rest, it went much as such things go. Pennington was not a wicked man, and I almost think that was the worst of it. He had told himself a kindly story until he believed it, and built a living man's grave upon a ledger, and he could not in the end see the shape of what he had done until it stood plain before him in a shuttered room. Constable Aggie Finch I saw again some months later, and she had her sergeant's stripes by then, sooner than her years would have promised. She told me, with the plain pride of a young officer who has learned the one lesson that matters, that she had never since taken a paper on trust, merely because it was filed and signed. "I look at the ink now, Doctor," she said. "I never used to look at the ink." I thought, when she said it, that Holmes had made a detective that morning at the yard without ever meaning to. There remained one small matter, and it was Holmes who would not quite let it go. "You marked it, Watson," he said to me one evening, late, with the lamp turned low and the case some weeks behind us, "that a disappearance so cleanly made was no work of frightened amateurs. Someone arranged it. And when I asked, in the one quarter that keeps such knowledge, I was told the same thing I have now been told before, that there is a hand in this city that smooths difficult matters away, and takes no money for it, but only a favor, owed, and called in later." He was quiet a moment, his eyes on the dark window. "No name, only a friend who must not be named, speaking to another friend. It is the second time this year that road has run out before me in the dark. I do not like a debt I cannot see the shape of. I have written it in the index with the other small things that do not yet make a picture. One day they will." He did not say more, and I did not ask. There are threads Holmes keeps to himself until they are ready, and I have learned to let him. But I will set down here, for my own part, the thing I could not shake from that case, and have not shaken since. We are a people very fond of our heroes. We raise them up, and we photograph them whole and laughing, and we send our pennies to keep them sailing. And we would a great deal rather they died gloriously in some place we cannot see than came home broken and sat in a chair with the strength gone out of one side of them. The waxworkers know it. They give us the hero as we wish to keep him, smooth and undimmed, in furs that have never once been cold. It took an honest man who would not flatter what he saw to set down the truth in wax. And it took a frightened girl who trusted her own eyes to bring it into the light. The furs at Verrall's, I am told, were quietly taken off the figure and the figure withdrawn. They had been into the ice twice, that great name and that broad beard. The furs themselves had never once been north of a costumier's back room. They never saw the ice at all. The furs at Verrall's, I am told, were quietly taken off the figure and the figure withdrawn. They had been into the ice twice, that great name and that broad beard. The furs themselves had never once been north of a costumier's back room. They never saw the ice at all.